what I'm going on to say is that I could respect. I mean, that I could have a respectful argument about. But Dr. Polkinghorne is a Church of England vicar. That means he's committed to Jesus redeeming our sins, to doing miracles, to being raised on the third day, to being born of a virgin. That's utterly different from the sort of sophisticated God of the physicists that you've just been invoking.
One of the things that Dr. Polkinghorne has said of you and of debating with Dawkins is hopeless because there's no give and take. He doesn't give you an inch. He just says no.
Have I not just given an inch?
When you say yes.
Have I not just given an inch?
He's not here with us, so I don't know how he'd interpret that.
But I have, haven't I? I said that a reasonable case could be made for a deistic God who started the laws of physics off, who laid down the physical constants and maybe even anticipated what might happen. That's giving an inch. I think it's a wrong argument, but I think it's a respectable argument.
Where's the evidence for that, though? I mean, when you
I'm
talk
not the
about
one who's I said that was a reasonable case to be
why
made.
though? Where's the evidence for that?
I'm bending over backwards. It's not up to me to provide the evidence. I think that's actually not a correct argument. But what I have said is that I think that a reasonable case could be made, and I said that specifically in order to contrast it with virgin births, raising from the dead, etc., which is infantile.
Have you come to that, or are you saying that? I mean, this sounds like you are being more flexible than you have been.
I've always been that flexible.
You have?
Yes.
You have always said in these debates, look, I can imagine a deistic higher power that set things in motion.
I do that in a spirit of bending over backwards to say this is a potentially respectable argument as opposed to the theistic argument for Jesus dying for our sins, virgin birth, water into wine. That's obvious nonsense. Any physicist should realize that.
Do you do that, though, because you feel you should to be open to debate, because you have been criticized as somebody who is every bit as fundamentalist in your views as people on the other side?
I do it because I'm honestly interested in the truth. And when I hear somebody saying, as a physicist, I believe that this is one thing that physicists quite often say. The physical constants, that set of half a dozen or so numbers, constants, which physicists at present can't explain, are very, very finely tuned, such that the end result of them is that evolution would eventually happen and we would eventually come into existence. That's the sort of argument that's been made by I think probably the physicist Paul Davies, for example. Now, that seems to me to be an adult, a grown-up argument. That's the sort of argument that you can engage with, and I think I would disagree with it, but I'm prepared to engage with that argument. I think it's an argument that one can respect. It's a sophisticated adult argument. And I say that often as a rhetorical device to contrast it with the childish argument about the imaginary friend who looks after you and saves you from death.
Do you, just back to Dr. Polkinghorne here for a minute before we go to the phones, do you, because you said you respect his work.
Well, I'm not a physicist, but I understand he's a very good physicist.
Right.
Yes.
And you respect his capabilities as an intellectual.
Sure, yeah.
But you're also aware that he serves as a vicar for the Church of England. Does that mean that his views on religion are infantile and unsophisticated?
Well, I can't absolutely be sure. I mean, I'm presuming that because he's a Church of England vicar, he does believe in those specifically Christian things. I know that there are other people who do. I mean, Francis Collins, the head of the American branch of the Human Genome Project, for example, is a highly sophisticated geneticist, molecular biologist, but he also really does believe in the details of Christian doctrine. I find that a very curious sort of split brain thing. On the one hand, you believe in evidence and you trust in evidence and you're skeptical as a scientist. On the other hand, you believe stuff that was just written down 2,000 years ago and has no authority at all.
But how about people who will say that the strongest faith is made up of a lot of doubt? Why can't you be a scientist who looks for truth and evidence to back your theory, and also be a person of faith who says, I don't think I have all the answers, and I doubt? That's part of the faith.
I think doubt is great. I mean, I'm a great doubter myself. But just think about what you've just said. You have just suggested, and indeed earlier you suggested as well when quoting Polkinghorne, that somebody who begins by saying, I doubt, I don't know, we don't know, we should keep an open mind. That's
Right.
great. On the other hand, they say, and I know that Jesus was raised from the dead, Jesus was born of a virgin. I mean, how confident, how arrogantly confident can you be than to say something like that? I don't say things like that. I don't say, I know something is true. I say, I doubt, I'm skeptical, I want to look at the evidence. It's the Christians who say, beyond a doubt, Jesus was born of a virgin. Jesus was raised on the third day.
Well, I think there's a spectrum, isn't there, of Christianity?
There is,
Like
but
you
I'm
will
talking
find some
about
Christians.
I'm talking about a fairly large majority who will say, by faith, I know that Jesus was born of a virgin. I mean, there's overconfidence for you, if you like.
Richard Dawkins is with us in the studio today. He speaks tonight at the University of Minnesota at Northrop at 7 o'clock. Evolutionary biologist, noted atheist, as you can hear if you're listening into the conversation. And I hope you'll join us, 800-242-2828. In the metro area, 651-2276-1000. Online at minnesotapublicradio.org. Click on Send a Question. Get into the argument here. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. 800-242-2828, 651-227-6000. If you're finding a busy signal on the lines, join us online at minnesotapublicradio.org and click on Send a Question to Simon in Superior, Wisconsin. Hi, Simon. You're up first.
Yes, thanks so much for taking my call.
Sure.
It's a real pleasure to be on the air. Yeah, I'll just preface my comments by saying I am a Christian. I do work for the Lutheran Church, but I really appreciate your guest's intellectual honesty. I think he speaks with great honesty and integrity, and frankly, I think I hear more from him than I do from many of the people he's debating who may also call themselves Christians.
Well, Simon, I'm curious about how you reconcile what he's saying about faith and science.
Absolutely. That's what I wanted to get to. I mean, for me, I'm sure my perspective is somewhat different than your guest, but I don't see, I don't necessarily, as I look back at the Bible, the virgin birth, well, that was just, there were all kinds of people were born of the virgin supposedly then, all kinds of people supposedly were raised from the dead. That was just the way they told stories. So I don't look at that, and many Christians clearly do take things in that literal sense. I don't. However, I look back at the tradition and see kind of great transcendent truth in there that is really, and I use truth not in some sort of literal, provable, unprovable sense, but a deep truth and learning. There seems to be a power there that's a bit more than can be put into words, and a bit different than just, well, I like jazz and you like blues, a bit more than just subjectivity. There seems to be something that I think my religious tradition at its best is trying to get to, and I think many other religions, I don't see it necessarily as a question of proving or disproving the existence of a divine puppeteer that either started things going or periodically intervenes to tell me which way to go.
Simon, hang on one second.
Sure.
You've given us a lot to talk about here, and I want to hear what Richard Dawkins has to say about that.
Well, obviously, if I may say so, you are one of the sophisticated Christians that I wasn't actually talking about before. What I'm curious about was why, when you say the things that you say, which obviously I can respect, why you bother to call yourself a Christian rather than saying that you believe in some kind of higher power. I mean, the Lutheran tradition that you espouse goes a lot further than just saying there is a higher power. And I should have thought that you would meet your own intellectual needs by saying, I don't know anything about this higher power, I just think that it is there, and that it had something to do with starting the universe off, perhaps running the way the universe goes on. But the so-called truths that you say you get out of your Lutheran tradition, I don't understand why you bother with them, really.
To the phones to Maura in Minneapolis. Hi, Maura, you're on Mid-Morning.
Hello,
Hi.
Thank you. My name's Moira Mannion, and first, Mr. Dawkins, I want to thank you so much for your book, because I grew up, especially during the 60s, I was thrown out of school because I was an atheist and said so, and refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And nowadays, I have, when people confront me about my beliefs or lack of beliefs, I can point to your books and the books that were inspired because your book was published and say, if you want some education about atheism, here's a place to look. And also, when person talking about, if